Well, I want to welcome everybody. There's far too many of you all, which I appreciate everyone joining this morning. But I'll make a quick round of introductions on our end, and then you'll hear from some of us, and then we'll be all here to answer questions and whatnot that come up at the end. But from the Recurve team, we've got Carmen Best, who's our head of policy. Many of you may know her. Matt Burton, who's our vice president of business development. Richard, who heads up our flex market implementation and market access actual programs, and then Randy, who you guys will get to know and works with aggregators like yourselves to get onboarded and get all the information you guys need to be successful in these programs and markets that we're developing. So yeah, I'm still just give things a minute here because I do see people still kind of actively logging in. So let's give it a couple more minutes to get moving. Awesome. All right. Well, without further ado, I'm going to jump into it. Appreciate everybody joining today on this webinar. We're really excited. We're here to talk about this new California market access program, which we really think of as a market. It can fit into that program world, but there's some very different aspects of market access to kind of your traditional energy efficiency program. And we think some huge opportunities for everybody on this call to not only contribute to California's peak energy crisis that we're having, and we are absolutely in a reliability emergency on our electrical system right now, but also make some money in the meantime. We can do well by doing good in this case. So a little bit of background. We're not gonna focus on the high level policy here. We're gonna go through a little bit of that at the beginning. We really want to focus on what it takes for companies who are out in the market. We call companies like that aggregators. What I mean by that is many to all of you, just knowing who signed up for this webinar, fall into the category of an aggregator from a Recurve perspective. And it's really anybody who's out engaging customers, and that can mean all sorts of different things, to reduce their load or make their load flexible in a way that is valuable to the grid. And so aggregators we work with range from program implementers that you're all familiar with, to companies controlling thermostats, to insulating attics, to EV charging and storage. One of the beauties of the flex market access approach in general is it's very much agnostic to the business model. We think all of you are better at developing business models than consultants, utilities, or us. So we want to leave that part of it to you. Now, what's driving this new market access program, and it kind of has come out of relative nowhere because it is really a response to an emergency. So California has a 4.4 gigawatt shortfall being forecasted for next summer during the system peak. That's 4,400 megawatt hours. That's a lot. That's big. So that's, a couple things happen at once. We have a hot spell and maybe one or two other things, and we're talking about systemic blackouts, which is not good for anybody, and also pretty poor politics from an elected official standpoint. So in July, Governor Newsom actually put out an emergency proclamation to all agencies saying, we have this shortfall coming. Every agency in California has to come up with solutions to this problem. And what that problem looks like, it's summer peak. So specifically this emergency reliability market access program that we're implementing is focused on 2022 and 2023, but that does not mean the problem ends there. By the way, that's just the scope of this first step in this market access flex market that's being implemented. And the real value to the grid and the big problem we're having is 4 to 9 p.m. on those summer months on the weekdays, and particularly the hours of 7, 8. And we'll get more into that. And there's tremendous value to the grid and to the state if we as a community can work with our customers in many different ways to shift load out of those peak hours. There's lots of ways to do that. We'll talk about that. You guys are the experts. Or make improvements that permanently reduce those system peaks. New air conditioners, insulating attics, smarter control systems that predictably and reliably shift peak. If you can do those things, there's a lot of money to be made, and we're also solving a real crisis that is very expensive and problematic to our grid. So in this webinar, we want to go through a little bit on what market access is and how it works. I'm going to take that piece and then get into some of the more details around where the arbitrage opportunity is, how companies, many of you guys have been out in the state working with customers, working with utility programs with all their benefits and also challenges. There's some real opportunity to, again, do something that is really critical to the state's energy goals, but also make a lot of money in the process, because the avoided cost, the alternative to reducing these peaks, and it's going to be an all hands strategy. We're not the only ones out there doing this, but it's a big problem. The alternative is blackouts, and that's a very expensive problem. So folks are, willing to invest in these reductions because the alternative is such a bad thing for the state. And we will absolutely be sharing slides and also probably some this video as well, if you want to pass it around. We'll talk about next steps as well. And that's really the key part, is we're going to explain how this all works and why we think there's a heck of a lot of upside and why you all should be paying attention to market access. It's coming very fast. Like I said, the Newsom's emergency proclamation happened in July, and I've never really seen commissions work very quickly, but they have. And by December 2nd, they'd have approved this market access ruling that we're about to describe. And we're already in the process of, particularly in Northern California, rolling it out. We are hopeful that we will be rolling it out in the rest of the state as well. So no time to lose, especially for the summer of 2022. And that's why we're not going to be able to give you, let me just say, there's a lot of things we know, and there are still some unknowns that are in process, but things are moving very quickly. And so where there are some gaps in what we're able to tell you concretely about how this is going to work, those are going to get filled very shortly. And in a normal program, no one would want to talk about any of it until everything's hammered out. But this is an emergency, and the summer of 2022 is right around the corner. So we think you all need to be thinking and planning for this immediately. So Carmen is here and can pipe in if we have kind of technical or detailed policy questions. But today's webinar is really going to be mostly focused on how all of you make market access and make some money doing it and solve this problem, and how we get started quickly. But at a very high level, the solution that the PUC came to on the efficiency side of the equation, and most of us think of efficiency as like rebates for insulation or something. We think of it a little differently. It sits on the same policy stack, but underlying all of those kind of prescriptive measures that we've come to think of as efficiency is predictable, forecastable hourly value of reduction, which is called the avoided cost calculator. And that's really what makes this efficiency, is we're not sending demand response signals. We're giving you a schedule of value that says, in these hours this summer, if you reduce load relative to a baseline, many of you are probably familiar with using open source tools that we can generate on an hourly basis, you can get paid for that, and you get paid pretty solid money for it. So the PUC allocated $150 million primarily to the investor-owned utilities to deploy, also with MCE, to scale up an electric-focused peak reduction market access program for the summer. Also doubling the MCE budget, where we have an existing flex market program, which will look very similar. We're going to try to make them contiguous. And based on the flex market program design that we're about to describe, and the important part in the word flex market, but also market access, we think that's a good generic term the PUC came up with, is the core of the flex market approach is really twofold. One, breaking down all the barriers and all of the transaction costs to get companies like yourselves engaged and able to monetize these grid benefits for your customers without a lot of complicated rules and trappings, and without us prescribing how you go to market in your business. And then leveraging population NMEC to pay for the savings delivered at the meter across your portfolio. And that payment goes to the aggregator, so that you have the same incentive as your customer. You actually make money when your stuff works. It's not just a pass through. And there's a lot more in population NMEC on our website. We're not going to get into the weeds on that sort of thing. We'd be happy to have those conversations, but we're going to stay focused on the making money part of this equation and why this is important to your business in this webinar. So flex market this is roughly the way we think about how it works. We want to work with you, get you guys engaged, and we'll talk a little bit more about what we call a flexibility purchase agreement, an FPA. So which says we're going to pay you, or it's really the investor-owned utility with these market access funds are going to pay you for the value of the flexibility that you deliver to your customers, measured at the meter. And your customers get to keep their benefits, but and that is what if we look at this kind of right-hand side, the business model, the tech, the financing, how you go to market, that's all you guys. We can do some things to help identify which customers are best, things like that. But at the end of the day, we want to leave you all to figure out in your own customer and your own business model. You engage those customers, which is again, we're essentially invisible in the background. They know we're here, but ultimately this is a value they could not otherwise monetize. you're free to take that cash flow and turn it into a discounted offering to the customer, lower interest rates, better marketing, better margins. It's up to you. You engage those customers, you help them shift load out of peak or insulate an attic with where there's a bad air conditioner running too hard, or replacing that air conditioner with a heat pump, whatever that is. We're going to then track the impact that you had to the demand at that customer site, rolling that up into all of your customers. And that's what we think of as a virtual power plant, is that aggregation of your customers, and then be able to get you paid for that grid benefit like a power plant on the back end. And so that, again, that payment flows, from the counterparty, the utility, focused on those peak reductions, to the aggregator, based on how you actually perform over the course of a year, measured performance. And that measured performance piece is really important. There's a tremendous amount of business opportunity in getting paid for what you deliver, not getting paid for averages. And I just want to give some basis for that. This is an example. This is messy reality on the top, and this is deemed models on the bottom. And so this is an example of an actual portfolio we're looking at, where the deemed values in this commercial portfolio assume everybody peaks in the middle of the day, but we're measuring morning and evening peaks, which are tremendously more valuable to the grid. And so this portfolio, is $48,000 more valuable just by calculating the actual impact. When we can talk about some things that will dramatically increase that value. If, for example, you target the customers, let's say you're doing an HVAC related project, let's see, HVAC, shell, controls. If you can figure out which customers use the most HVAC energy during the peak periods we care most about, those customers can be 2-3 times more valuable to you and the grid. And so not getting stuck with the average produces tremendous opportunities for your businesses to really drive significantly new margins, right? By selecting for the technologies and the customers that actually deliver the most outcomes, and not being stuck with that average load shape impact that we use in our traditional programs. This is an example, just kind of a generic example of kind of a roll up of avoided cost values. We will work with you guys and provide you, if you haven't actually experienced the avoided cost calculator, nobody really has. We make that really easy to understand in a different way. But again, the utilities are paying for the delivered flexibility based on these NMEC rules that we can certainly provide lots of details on, but they're very crystallized and clear. And what we're able to do is paying out the total systems benefit in each hour. So what is that hour worth, and from an avoided cost basis relative to the cost of blackouts and storage on the grid and other things that feed in there. And with the peak being 4 to 9 p.m. summer weekdays, 7 and 8 being net peak, much more valuable. And so we're paying total systems benefit, and I'll get into kind of the payment calculation. The market access program itself has changed those calculations. They're much more lucrative than they ever have been in a traditional efficiency program. I'll touch on that in a second. So a couple things going on here. First of all, in market access, relative to any traditional program, one of the things and I've cut out the numbers on purpose because this is a little bit in flux, but will be hammered out shortly and in plenty of time for planning purposes. But shifting load is more valuable than it's ever been. So one of the things that the ruling instructs to be done that we're supporting is shifting value in the avoided cost hours into the summer peak period. And so we're seeing and this is a representation of the peak period, and with 7 and 8 being net peak hours, the most valuable. And so unlike kind of traditional dispatchable DR, these are scheduled values. You'll know exactly what each day is worth in advance in each hour. And there is no requirement for a 5-hour demand response call, like is often the case with CAISO transactions. There's significant value if you can pre-cool a building, turn off a third of the lights in a parking garage, whatever literally whatever you can do, get folks to, reschedule, their dishwashing or other types of processes out of this peak. So shifting from, 7 to 6 is actually valuable. Of course, if you can shift out of system peak, that's going to be the most valuable, but there's more arbitrage than there ever has been from a shifting standpoint. So looking around the room here, do you have customers? Do you have BMS systems? Can you engage them to shift their loads out of peak? And that can be fancy pants, DERMS controlling devices. It can be working on O&M to just reschedule loads, to make adjustments. This is, again, not a dispatch you have to respond to on a real-time basis. It's going to be the entire summer. You're going to know in advance. So it opens it up to all sorts of different approaches to load shifting. And it's highly valuable because of the increased value that is going to be put on these peak periods. So there's more differential and then more arbitrage, more money to be made. The other really exciting piece is how valuable long-term, traditional energy efficiency, and I only air quotes around traditional because this is installing stuff, whether it's insulating attics or HVAC or heat pumps or any number of types of equipment behind the meter, chillers, refrigerants, refrigeration systems, you name it. Now, we are able to, in a non-shifting world, we're actually implementing a key measure. Those measures have useful lives. And we're able to pay out for the useful life of the measure based on that first year that we're measuring. How did you affect load? That then is replicated in out years. We're paying out over the course of this first year. So you'll be fully paid out at the end of 13 months, essentially, quarterly for each project. But for projects where we install HVAC or a chiller, or you do, that has a useful life, we will actually pay for the system's benefit over the useful life. The way Flex Market has been constructed previously is kind of the reverse of any traditional energy efficiency program, which is we are measuring and quantifying the total system's benefit. That's literally what we do. What did you do to the grid and what is that worth? And traditionally, like every utility program in California roughly is running on a total resource cost test equation, which says the administrative cost and the customer spend plus the incentive that is delivered must equal the total system's benefit, or at least that's a TRC of 1. That's cost effective. And so one of the things that's happening, it's always been a big problem, is that deep retrofits require investing in stuff, COGS, which is really a good thing. But when you have to take that out of the incentive value, even though these projects often deliver great value, a chiller that's being installed, that's really about comfort and other reasons that it's being done by the customer using their own money, gets deducted out of the system's benefit, which we never believed made any sense. So that's changed in market access. And they've removed the participant cost, also known as COGS, from the payment process that we're delivering. So we're now able to pay out the total system's benefit minus only admin, which is drastically more valuable for long-term energy efficiency measures that are being implemented. And these are just some examples of the value change that we're seeing. These are on the top are projects that were in the Flex Market last year, running on total resource cost test, where we're deducting the value or the cost, that the customer is spending on their project. And we're seeing, lighting and, things like refrigeration and HVAC having enormous step ups in value, because again, that the cost to the customer is no longer pulled out of the incentive, it's payable, and it's payable to the aggregator, which makes a ton of sense, right? Like, why in the world should the benefit to the system deduct the spend that the customer is giving for their own bill savings and comfort and the likes? It's never really, it's been something that many of us have been arguing for well over a decade, but now but it's been actually implemented in this market access program for the summer emergency. So drastic increases in values across the board, and the more COGS you have, the bigger the increase. But again, deep retrofits deliver deep savings. It's always been the TRC calculation that makes it look not cost effective. And we even see cases, this is a residential case, where things that were totally not in the money last year because of those COGS are now quite valuable in the market, in market access, using this new cost test approach. So I don't know how many of you are Arrested Development fans, but I just keep saying there's a lot of money in the banana stand. And if you don't understand that reference, you can Google it. I can't help myself. And then one other thing to just mention, we're not going to dig into at all, but this, population NMEC is pay for performance. And that's what makes it simple, right? We don't have to create a 250-page rule book, because aggregators are getting paid for what is actually delivered and what that value is. And that lets us back away from micromanaging everything you do and pre-approving every measure and all of that. We do need to know measures so that we can get an EUL, but that's about it, right? At the end of the day, a useful life. So one of the things I'm just going to put out there, we could, as all of you kind of engage and we get better data so that we can forecast for you and the utility, but more importantly for you, what your yields are going to look like and how valuable your customer projects are in your portfolio. I just want to put out there that getting paid over time, and again, it's really only a 1-year thing. Every project is mature at the end of again, it's 13 months because we block out a month, but at the end of a year of operation, we pay fully. even if it's a 12-year measure. But that can be challenging also, carrying a cash flow. So I just want to put out there that we are also facilitating project finance or infrastructure investing as well, as we get more forecastable data where all of you can actually get paid, or at least can finance a good percentage of that downstream cash flow, and not have to wait to get paid, which is how you build power plants ultimately. That's how you finance a power plant based on its future cash flow. And we're able to bring that same type of capital into this equation. So pretty exciting on that front as well. That may not be that, like I said, we'll work with all of you, and it's really dependent on the level of data you have and how confident we all can be around your yields. And we're going to talk more about how we're going to help you get to confidence, and also set some forecasts that are discounted so that you can get started. And you don't. There's enough money here. We think that using the data that we have to forecast yields and then applying a reasonable discount rate, like everyone can be in a positive place. So with that, I want to actually hand it over to Randy. You gonna come back on video, Randy? There he goes. So Randy is our head of partnerships, and his basic job is to work with all of you to help you all figure out how to onboard into the market access program, which is very easy. This is not an RFP, right? You have to meet a few minimum qualifications and sign a couple really standardized, relatively simple documents to get started and get engaged. We even have some steps before that. And then the important part is helping you to understand and be confident in the types of impacts you're having and what those are likely to be worth, and having the process of enrolling your customers as quickly as possible, because again, there's a lot of value and we want to be posting numbers this summer. So Randy's job is to work with all of you to socialize this inside your companies, get all the information that you need, and get integrated into what is a very simple process to get your customers to be part of the market access program and get paid for that value. Randy, you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thank you, Matt. And thanks for that introduction. So yeah, just very simply here, we're going to talk about this at a high level and then dig down into the details. The first step in this process is signing a flexibility purchase agreement.
Sorry.
Matt, yeah, thanks. So I'll just go through this quickly. Signing a flexibility purchase agreement. We're going to help you target customers, enroll projects, and then we'll track those over time for you so you know how well your projects are doing. And of course, finally, the final step is receiving payments. Next slide, Matt.
I think that is, it's quarterly payments, but just to be very clear, is where it talks about the life of the measure, it's fully paid out in 1 year. That you're not, even if the measure is a 10-year measure, you're not waiting around for 10 years for payments.
Good point. So the first thing that we can do to help this whole aggregator network is to get your all's logos on our website. We'll post this link, but you can go to this link and upload your logo and get it on the website. And you'll see at the end, our last slide, we have some logos that we're showing. Thanks, Matt, for posting that. So go to this link, get your logo on our website. Step number one. Number two slide, Matt. Okay, step number two. Schedule an onboarding meeting with me. I saw some names on the list today, people who I've met with already, which is great. But of the 116 people who had registered for this webinar, probably only 3 had done that already. So, reach out to me on my email address. We'll post the link to schedule an appointment with me, and I can go over more details. So that's step number 2. So as Matt said, we have some standard documents that are fairly simple. First one is a flexibility purchase agreement. It's what we call it's a hunting license that will allow you all to start submitting projects. And we have a link to that as well. We'll provide that to you. And then we have other standard forms. There's a standard NDA and a standard M&V plan, and those are coming. There'll be one for each utility company in every market that we participate in, that you participate in, I should say. And so those are coming, and we'll post those on our website as well.
And just thinking about how this works, that flexibility purchase agreement, that's, we're working with different IOUs, different CCAs, regional energy networks, hopefully some munis soon. The idea is, again, to reduce transaction costs and create consistency for all of you. So everything that we're doing is trying to create a consistent framework across all of these, what we would call counterparties, folks that are willing to pay for sometimes stackable benefits. That might be a CCA might be willing to pay for gas reductions on top of, the electric reductions from MAPS, from the market access program. So the idea being the flexibility purchase agreement is consistent, and then, each buyer, whether that's a utility or a CCA or whatever, will have their own M&V plan that has some specific rules associated with their market. Again, the idea here being trying to make it as seamless to all of you as humanly possible. So it feels like one big market, not a bunch of different patchwork quilts of different rules.
Good point. So step number 4, forecasting your cash flow. We're going to help you find those projects that have the biggest impact, particularly between 4 and 9. And as Matt said, even hours 7 and 8 are the most valuable. So we'll work with your team. You let us know what you've got in terms of projects, customers. We'll help you identify those projects that will create the greatest cash flow and the best return for your investment. That we're going to do that with some data that we have. We're going to help you target customers as well. And we'll provide you with an avoided cost curve that will allow you to calculate your own values. But there are a number of ways that we can help. Sort of low touch is that we provide you with avoided cost curve, and you compare that or multiply that times your kilowatt hours reduced for a typical project. And at the other end, we'll actually take some of your data and run it through our models and help you create a forecast for for each project individually. But then we want to see also, what's your total potential? So do you have 5 projects you're working on next year, or 5,000 projects? And what do we think the kWh reduction will be? Matt, did I miss anything on that slide?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I would just touch on in general, this is something I'd love to, folks, if folks want to talk about this, one of the bigger challenges we have as a community is, many of us have been in the energy efficiency and DR worlds for, I don't know, way too long, embarrassingly long. We've been running these programs for 30, 40 years, more actually. That's an old stat. And there's often a deficit of data, like on what where actual impacts are, which can be challenging. And so this is really a process. And, getting the beautiful thing here is that once you're enrolling projects, you're going to have access to a part of our platform that lets you track their impact for your customers and know how you're doing. And again, when we talk about there's kilowatt hours, but we're really focused, everything we're doing is reduction on an hourly basis. And that is for your businesses to move in the future. This is information you have to have. You just got to know it. This is the future of everything we're doing. There isn't even such thing as a kilowatt hour reduction in California anymore. We're in a 2-year hiatus as we shift to total systems benefits. All California efficiency is specifically measured on when the savings happen on a going forward basis. And so getting that confidence and that ability, for you guys is a bit of a process in many cases. And so that's where, Randy was saying, well, we really want to work with you. It's going to be often imperfect to start with. Now, if you had 1,000 projects in the last 2 years in PG&E territory, and you had data access and we can run those numbers, that would be fantastic. That's like the gold standard. But there's quite a bit of other options. We have data that we can sometimes share. That's other similar stuff. We can look at your past projects in a sample. We can even utilize models and predictions and other data sets. And the idea is getting, confidence in particularly those summer peak savings. That's where the value is. And also applying a realistic discount rate to start with, so we don't want anybody to get in trouble here. So, figuring out what we think is going to happen and then discounting and then setting expectations appropriately. We hope you hit it out of the park. especially because we can target actual good customers and the likes. But setting those expectations, and we think this is lucrative enough that even a discounted value stream to start with is going to be really attractive. And the really cool thing from a data standpoint is many of us don't know anything right now, which is kind of scary and give it nuts when you think about it. And that's none of anybody's fault. It's been so hard to get this information. But you join the market access program, you set expectations appropriately, you're getting feedback every quarter. This is not a black box. You're gonna have good data fast. And that's also one of the major reasons to get started is it's gonna be a race to the companies that are most competitive and able to respond to the future of the grid are the ones that have confidence in their yields on all fronts. And this is how we get there. So there's a bunch of work we're gonna do, and we will put in the time to work with you up front. But getting started is the most important thing. So this is I'm gonna fix this apparently. 1 second. I have a funny feeling if I do this. Oh, I don't know. Whatever. So Google's. There was a nice image of a bunch of logos that seem to be lost. Oh, there we go. Fixed.
Oh, there you go.
Can't explain it. But yeah, I'll just, as Randy was saying, and then we'd love to, we don't want to belabor this if you all feel comfortable, but we're very open to having, Q&A, which you're welcome to coming off this slide, unmute or type it in the chat. It's all good. If you're not comfortable with that, because, everyone here it's a lot of cooperation out there, I think. I mean, we look at this as market access floats all boats. There's plenty of room in this market, it'll be a luxury to all have to compete at some point. But again, we're trying to make this as easy as possible on you. That first step, if you go to that link that has network.html, we would really kind of appreciate that first step of registering, which will let us talk about kind of all the cool companies that are moving to this pipeline, but there's no requirement there, and you can always back out. It lets us put your name on this list of others as we go through the flexibility purchase agreement process and get you guys engaged and up to speed. So that's a great first step. And then, as Randy was saying, we'd love to schedule a call to work to answer direct questions and potentially socialize this with others in your company that probably have to ask the same questions twice, which we get. And then this two-prong approach of checking the box in the flexibility purchase agreement, which is a very standardized doc. Like everybody's got to have the same FPA in the market to be fair. So there's not a lot, of lawyering to be done, but we've had that reviewed a bunch of times. And then most importantly, kind of getting you all spooled up and ready to start bringing projects into this marketplace in time for summer. And it's going to be open for business, both in terms of that shifting flexibility and infrastructure projects that we're actually implementing measures. We're happy to have both happen. Again, the economics are drastically better in both cases. In terms of posting numbers for 2022, it seems most likely that flexibility, operating existing stuff will have the most reach, for this summer, just because it is, closing in on the end of January already. But that's not a rule. By all means, we'd like to see lots of infrastructure also. Cool. If anybody, like I said, we're not here to use up anybody's time. Our whole thing is low transaction costs, but you got all of us. Anybody have thoughts or questions that you want to post either into chat or come off mute? Otherwise, we can send you on your merry way. We will harass you a little bit after the fact to move you through this process and at least get that next step going.
Hey, Matt, this is Bob Gunn. I think I'm listed as Randy Roy in the login.
It's all good.
Thanks for the presentation. When can we start to enroll customers? And can you clarify if it's just PG&E right now, or when will we know more about San Diego or Edison?
So, like I said, there's a few things that we don't totally know yet. So you have to consider a bunch of this stuff in process. And because this is all happening in an emergency for the summer, we're working on parallel paths. And so we're trying to get that start date as early as humanly possible. The utilities, our counterparties are moving very quickly, but we don't have a date yet. And that will be something we'll be in a lot of communication about. There's some of the gaps, and these aren't really gaps, they're actively being worked on. This thing got approved December 2nd for launch this summer. So that's, we're going to be transparent, but we need a little bit of patience while we iron out the details. So precise launch date exactly how that avoided cost reshaping, again, shifting more into peak value is not, that's why I cut the numbers out of we're just not there yet. It's not our choice. We're helping the utilities and regulators figure that out. We have a good idea where it's headed, and it's going to be solved for fairly soon. So those details are going to get flushed out in real time. And we're just, I guess our approach is we're going to keep you guys in the loop as much as humanly possible through all of that process. And we just have to be running somewhat parallel paths. Best I can do. Oh, and I could talk about the scope, the spate. We have to be, things are in process. So I would just say that we're very confident about Northern California coming online. We are working diligently also with others to hopefully have the whole state implementing market access. That will also be sorted out, over the next month or two in more precision. So when you guys know us, we're just going to be as open and transparent as we can be on all of this stuff as it's figured out. A couple of things. Oh yeah, so I guess Carmen was just mentioning, just so you guys can read this in the chat, but the advice letters on how this all proceeds is due February 7th, and a lot of the questions will get ironed out kind of in that process as well, which is all moving very, very fast. So a couple things, I guess. Somebody could probably post the link to the market access blog, which has links to the decision and all that rigmarole into the chat. There you go. Oh, that's the direct link, but also maybe our blog, just because reading rulings is only sort of fun some of the time to some people. We have a blog that kind of pulls out the parts we think are most important. In terms of the financing, this is something we'll work with you. This is really, I mean, frankly, very exciting, because when we think about financing for efficiency, we're almost always talking about asset and credit-based financing, which is consumer financing. That's how people pay for HVAC. And we sometimes call it project finance, but it's not definitionally. So we are kind of on the bleeding edge, and have been, we don't provide the financing. In fact, very importantly, Recurve's role is we are agnostic and neutral to your business model, to the cash flows. We don't take performance risk because we're the ones calculating the numbers, and that'll be a real moral hazard. So we're working with finance companies, project infrastructure finance companies, who can front they can buy your cash flow and front some of the money. And again, that's really, if you're going to build a power plant, that's what you do. We're going to sell, electrons from our natural gas turbine for the next 20 years. And here's how much money that's worth. And we need, $100 million to build it up front. You're going to get a piece of that future action. That's how infrastructure actually gets built. And over time, that becomes very low cost and extremely plentiful capital. We're right at the beginning of that, which I think is tremendously exciting, but it's fairly new art. So the ability to finance your cash flow is really how we talk about that, working with you to get confident in what you're implementing and what we think it will yield, and how good is our data on that. Because if you think about it, if you're not confident, why would an investor be confident? And again, part of that is you're not going to be perfectly confident out the gate in particular, and everybody knows that, and that's okay. But we want to get as confident as it can be, and then also discount that and say, we think it's X, but there's a bunch of things we don't know. So we're only going to bet on some percentage of X actually being there. And then the project finance investors, based on that, and Inflex markets are providing upfront capital, for at least a percentage of that downstream cash flow, so that you can actually build the project upfront and have that capital on the front end. And again, that's called infrastructure finance. So it's something we're really excited about, and we're happy to work with all of you on, and we'll get drastically easier with just a little bit better data. So that's a lot what we're going to all learn in this first year or two of market access, is we're going to go from data to good data. And again, that's going to open a lot of doors. Right. We're happy to take any more questions. Again, I understand it's kind of a big webinar of people. So we're also, just, like I said, more than happy to engage, and really want to engage with each of you directly, because obviously you're all sort of competitors and whatnot. And this is a lot to digest. We will follow up with we're recording this webinar and these slides, but it's worth it all of us to do a bit of a dive. So again, just from a flow standpoint, we would love you to, click on that link. Well, you can't quite click on the link to this network, give us your information so that we can include you, which is, again, not obligatory, but what it really does, honestly, is, most of the companies on there today have actually signed flexibility purchase agreements and are active in the market. Part of what enables us to kind of keep the momentum up, frankly, and communicate the interest from the market in this approach is being able to show, frankly, that the coolest companies are engaging. And that helps us, communicate the potential to our utilities, counterparties, and regulators, and creates momentum. So, and you'll show up on the main site as we, until the FPA is signed, you're not actually eligible, and you wouldn't show up as an eligible contractor in market access or any of the other existing markets till you sign those kind of next step agreements, which we can do over a short period of time. But that's a real helpful step. And that can be first or second. And then the other piece is reaching out to Randy and maybe, figuring out if there's any others internally that need to be engaged and doing a kind of a more specific conversation about your business and the potential there and what you all need to get comfortable. Right. Well, if there's nothing else, you know how to find us. And we appreciate everybody's time today. And in the spirit of low transaction cost, you got a half hour back roughly. Go sell some business. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.